just go, man. Let's just go.
Fuck it. We'll do it live.
Do it live. That's how the professionals handle things.
That's us.
Huh? That's what people are often saying this about both of us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, so this is Rob here with Spooky J. Spooky J. Jordan Yule. That's what he's known as these days.
Please refer to me only for the next few days as Spooky J.
It's spooky season. It's necessary. Yeah. Are you doing anything, like any Halloween costume parties or any kind of...
Ken and his wife and my partner and I are going to do like a ghost tour of
cool.
DC. That's what we talked about doing.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, if we don't get scared.
Is DC a big ghost town? I guess it must be, right?
I don't know.
All kinds of nasty history there.
Yeah, but just like
dwell on.
all of those things are always like, and people say that this building is haunted. I hope they take us to like the house across the street from Ford's Theater, and it's like Abraham Lincoln still haunts this house. Like that'd be That's like that'd be cool. I would imagine it's just gonna be like, hey, here's the Exorcist steps from the movie over in Georgetown, and probably some like weird houses where like, I don't know, Steve Bannon tried to start like a new like fash group. I don't know. I'll let you know. But that's it. I want to watch like there's like some new horror movies out that I really want to check out. I haven't even seen X yet, and I heard that was pretty good. And Barbarian is now streaming. So there's a couple spooky movies that I would like to watch. Are you a spooky movie guy?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Is that just kind of like, I guess, or are you into it?
No, I am.
You're not.
No, I was
just
you kind of stepped on my. I had a kind of a joke that I was maybe a little bit. I used to be a big horror movie guy, maybe less so in the later years, but it used to be a big part of my sort of identity, as part of my geeky sort of identity.
Oh, really?
I was going to say though, you kind of stepped on my ability to do this, but maybe Ken Klippenstein can go for his costume. He can go as someone who's not incredibly irritating.
Oh, fuck!
Sorry,
that's good.
I probably should have. I'm going to splice that into earlier when you mentioned.
Get my reaction in there though.
Yeah, we haven't done the being mean to Ken bit in a while, and I just felt like it was time to bring that back. You know, our listeners love that, the classic bit where we say mean things to Ken Klippenstein.
Someone tweeted about the ban to me like yesterday or 2 days ago, and I thought that was funny. It's like, this is still a thing. This has been like 2 years now. Now he hasn't been on the show for a while. He's actually banned now. It finally took after all that. Now he's just big timing us.
Yeah, exactly. After all that effort.
That's okay. We're going above his head though. We got his boss on the show today.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we're talking to Ryan Grim today. That should be good. We talked to him about the incredible political bravery of the House Progressive Caucus and their letter that they sent to the Biden administration about Ukraine. Yeah, just a stunning display of political bravery, and Ryan was able to come and break that down for us.
But also the stunning display of people on Twitter who 5 times a day tweet, "I stand with Ukraine, retweet if you do too," with like a Ukrainian flag. Like those are, I think, in this conflict, those are the real war heroes.
Exactly. And we should be celebrating those people. They're really doing the real work out there, the real heroes. So that's going to be a great conversation with Ryan Grim. As to your previous question, I am a big spooky movie guy. Oh, okay. I actually do have a story about this. Because, I have my son he's like turning 7 years old. So I've introduced him to a few little spooky things, we have. And like we did one weekend, we watched like Ghostbusters 2. We watched Beetlejuice. We showed him that. There's been some fun. Monster Squad. We've watched a couple times. Some more kid friendly horror movies. And then I kind of got it into my head that I was like, you know what? He really likes he likes this kind of stuff. He likes zombies and that kind of thing. He likes this he likes old stuff. He really loves Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's going as Mr. Hyde for Halloween this year. He really likes this kind of old stuff. So I was like, you know what? The original Night of the Living Dead, it's probably by today's standards, it's pretty tame. It's black and white. probably there's a million things that kids have seen by the time they're 7 years old that doesn't even, that makes it look like not that even that big of a deal. Like we can probably watch that. That'll be kind of fun to watch the original Night of the Living Dead. And for the most part, it was totally okay. But then I did kind of forget. I loved the movie, but it had been a while since I'd seen it. And there is some pretty disturbing shit that happens in the last act of that one. And I was kind of watching it, especially the scene at the end when there's this little girl who like becomes a zombie and then like takes a big bite out of her father and then brutally murders her mother with like a garden trowel or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of watching that just being like, okay, maybe I may have jumped the gun a little bit on this one. I don't know if this is the best. I could have waited maybe till 8 to bust this one out. Well, I felt a little weird about it.
What did he do?
He was a little freaked out by it. I think there was a little bit much, but again, he seemed fine. He's resilient. He didn't mind. And I made sure to explain that, it's a movie, and all the people that made the movie, when they finished doing it, they were all just pretending, and they all went home to their families, and they were all okay. And, I kind of tried to do one of those things. Mm-hmm. But then the next day he was just like, I should not have watched that. That was really...
Oh, great.
That was really violent. And I was like, yeah, okay. Okay, maybe let's drop this. Let's not mention this anymore. So that was my Halloween spooky movie awkward situation that happened.
Nice. And now he's got something to talk about in therapy for the next 30 years. That's great.
Exactly. You can't make it too easy for them. You got to give them... For any parents out there, that's my main thing. You gotta throw them a few curveballs every now and then. Don't let them get too comfortable.
Oh, it's so funny. Was there a movie that you ever saw as a kid that really scared you?
Poltergeist.
I was thinking of one. Poltergeist. I'll go after you. How so?
I don't know. It was just something that I watched. Like I was obsessed with Ghostbusters when I was a kid. It was my favorite. It was one of those first movies that I saw that I was really obsessed with, and I just wanted to talk about it all the time. And I had all the Ghostbusters toys and stuff. But I remember that I think my like older brothers and my family were watching Poltergeist, one of the Poltergeist films. And I somehow I think I was maybe in bed and I kind of snuck out and caught a glimpse of it. And it just it triggered some horrible reaction. And for years, my family would taunt me because they would go, Carol Ann, because I guess there's some creepy guy I believe it was Poltergeist 3, who says Carol Ann, and they would just say that to me, and I'd go, stop it. But yeah, it's just something that one messed me up. It messed me up pretty good.
I have one that is so funny to look back on now. But it was I must have been 4 or 5, and it's not a Halloween movie. It's not a horror movie, but for some reason, the scene in A Christmas Story where the kid gets his tongue stuck on the
okay
pole?
Yeah,
that for some reason
with you. It's stuck
when I was
you.
4 or 5. Yeah, it freaked me out. It maybe it was the bullying element and him being kind of stranded there, and I don't know. I just have this vivid memory as a kid of that just really disturbing me, this kid in distress and stuck.
Yeah.
I didn't want to watch A Christmas Story for the next few years. It's always on
because of that part. Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't understand. There was I think it was just on TV and I saw a few minutes and then that part and didn't really understand the whole movie, that it was a comedy, and I avoided it for the next few years until I finally got a better understanding of what the movie was about. As a young child, that part specifically freaked me out.
Yeah, I didn't remember the movie that much, but I definitely remember the idea. There's a strong fear of getting your tongue stuck to a pole in the winter. That seemed like a really pervasive threat.
Yeah,
that could happen at any time. I don't know why. It's one of those things when you're a kid, you think quicksand is going to be this big problem in your life.
Yes,
it's one of those things.
Yeah,
yeah. You think you're going to need some kind of some kind of thermos of warm water to get your tongue off there. Uh-huh. Never happened to me though, nor anyone that I know. So I don't know.
Yeah, thankfully.
maybe our worries about our fears were maybe a little overblown. Who knows?
Perhaps. What do you make of this whole stop big oil activists throwing paint and soup and gluing themselves to and whatever famous pieces of art?
I mean, like, the art is fine, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think people that are just like clutching their pearls about this, or even people that are from the other side being like, it's cringe or whatever, like, okay. But I mean, we lose sight of the fact that we're in a very serious crisis when it comes to our addiction to fossil fuels and how that negatively affects the climate of the planet that we have to live on. I think sometimes we maybe lose sight of that. And I'm not going to get worked up over people that are engaging in this kind of activism, to try to draw attention to this. No one's being harmed by it. The art is okay. I don't really understand the pearl clutching over it. Just who cares? Throw the soup you want. Throw the soup at art if it's get people talk about this very serious problem. Let's do it. I don't see the big deal.
Yeah. I think it's fine. Totally agree with what you said. The art is behind protective glass. None of it's damaged. The frame on one of them got soup on it. Don't care. That's not the valuable part.
Oh, no, not the frame. Oh, my goodness.
Right. And just like the whole reason they're doing this is because they know it is shocking and they know people will talk about it, which will prompt conversations about why they're doing it and the moral imperative of taking action because climate change is such a devastating existential threat. And the people who are like tutting it are the people who typically don't agree that we need to take drastic, serious steps to rectify this issue or mitigate the worst consequences or outcomes. And those people were never going to be on our side to begin with. I don't understand, like the cringe thing. I don't care, because I think just people who do that about everything because they want to be cool or want to be detached or whatever. But like, you're not helping. Sorry, you're just not. I'm so fucking exhausted with all of it because you're not doing anything anyway. Like, if the people who just like for everything, it's like, oh, this is cringe, this sucks, oh, this is lame, okay, lib. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing beyond just saying that? And time again, it's nothing. So I don't really pay much mind to that. I think that we have seen even the quote best, biggest, most historic climate bill among developed countries. This is, the Inflation Reduction Act. That's what the Biden administration and his allies have framed it as. That is not enough on its own. It has, also faced basically nullification in some respects because of this potential permit reform that Manchin's been pushing, and now it seems like Biden might take up after the election. And these problems are going to continue to fester. That they're doing this is to inspire. They're doing this to inspire conversations. It's working. People are still talking about it. I see it constantly. I learn more about the big oil funding of art museums that I otherwise would not have. And now also this comes at a time where we're in a quarterly earnings season, and today, we're recording this on Thursday, Shell announced that it basically doubled its profit from quarter 3 of last year. They're having record quarters again, high gas prices, despite supply not being that expensive, they're just profiteering off people's backs. And, we see Exxon and Chevron's tomorrow, Friday, probably going to be similar, a similarly successful quarter for them. These companies are thriving. They are under no threat from changes by the U.S. to shift to green energy. And the healthier they are, the worse things will become for us. So I think that the fact that we're even talking about this and the need for change because of these activists is a good thing.
Yeah, and not only are these companies thriving, but we're kind of allowing them in some cases to sort of rebrand as companies that are compassionate and care about the climate issues. And Exxon really is committed to this net zero future and using all these kind of buzzwords about climate. And completely ignore their role in creating this crisis to begin with. not just through the relentless use of fossil fuels, but as we've talked about many times, deliberate, like it's their own scientists being at the forefront of climate science and understanding full well what their activities were causing and what the result was going to be, and then deliberately covering that up. Like, that's a serious crime. And not only are we allowing that, but like our governments are doing it as well. Like you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. The Canadian government is in on this as well. You have Justin Trudeau, who talks like he's this big climate warrior. The Liberal Party of Canada recently released this plan to have only zero emissions vehicles on the roads by 2035 or something like that, something along those lines. While simultaneously, just as the American government is doing, doubling and tripling down on fossil fuel extraction and pipelines, fracked gas is a big part of the Biden administration and what they've been offering to Western Europe as a alternative to Russian oil and gas. So it's on two levels, like on the private sector and the public sector. Our governments are kind of pulling this sleight of hand, talking about the climate crisis, and these big oil companies talking about the climate crisis, talking about them being part of these bold solutions, while simultaneously engaging in all the exact same behavior that's led to the crisis to begin with. So yeah, the fact that there's some activists in the UK or wherever else engaging in activity that's at least causing these discussions to happen, yeah, like I think that's a good thing. We're already experiencing the devastating consequences of it in North America and throughout the rest of the world, and it's going to be in the global south where a lot of these consequences are going to be the most devastating. And I don't think like we're nowhere near taking the level of action that we need to take. So whatever it is that people feel they have to do to try and force these conversations to happen, I would support it. And I don't really get the pearl clutching over it or the finger wagging. Let people throw soup at paintings if that's what's going to get us talking about this. Do we need to do a lot more? Absolutely. But at least it's something. At least people are doing something. I take solace in that.
You're right. Right, I'm all for it. I think it's fine. I don't understand it. Understand the outrage, but whatever.
People just like to get mad about stuff. It seems like I'm learning this.
Are bored.
Yeah,
I would say go outside and touch grass, but apparently you can't say that.
You can't. No, you can't do that.
Oh,
maybe stay in and order some groceries or.
We never got into that. We never got into that.
I'm
we
not touching
to see
that
one day.
No, I can't.
You have to.
I think there was like 5 whole days of discourse about that on Twitter. It's cruel. It's cruel and ableist to not be able to like whip your a gig economy slave when they get you diet soda instead of Coke Zero.
It was like the perfect Rorschach test for like performative people on Twitter. It was just how you see this issue. Is someone who, by their own admission, from what I understand, is not disabled, is them being moderately inconvenienced by their Instacart shopper saying things are out of stock. Is the existence of disabled people enough to allow them to go scream at somebody who is underpaid and underappreciated, doesn't get benefits? And it was just whatever your worldview is, it was projected onto that. So it was all this like outrage and performative, just trying to one up each other over which was actually worse. And it was just kind of this like oppression Olympics on social media for several days that I just like you didn't take any part in because I don't care, but I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, and then it was just like that fucking union cat got some person who has a profile picture of the cat and just like tweets about unions, like all took one side and it was the worker side. And it was like, oh my god, this is gonna be. People were like melting down. It's like fetch my
fainting couch
when the cat is on the wrong side of history. It just
because responding to a person who was like, I physically went to the store to confront the person who was messing up my grocery order.
Yeah.
Not someone that was like physically unable to do anything, but literally just someone that was just like didn't want to and wanted someone else to do it. I was like, maybe you should just go do it yourself if you want it to be done properly. And yeah, that was a big. That's what makes me think. I think that's total. I think this is all an op. Frankly, I don't want to get too conspiratorial about this. I think every now and then, it's like the CIA or whoever just needs to. We need to deploy the Postmates ableism argument again. We got some bad shit going on, and we gotta keep everyone distracted. I think that's the only possible explanation that makes sense to me.
And it also illustrated how, like, this is also why I just have kind of reined in how much I use Twitter and how I use it. It is not a place to have conversations like that at all whatsoever.
No.
Because nowhere was anybody saying disabled people shouldn't have groceries delivered to them.
No.
Nobody. Nobody was saying that. But that was like a narrative that people were driving, advocates were driving. It was like, oh, well, I guess you don't want somebody who can't walk to get their groceries delivered. Like,
no, that's not true.
Nobody in their fucking right mind would ever say that.
Yeah. No. Very bizarre. It's a very bad place, Twitter. I don't know.
Yeah. Congrats to everyone on a great round of posting, though. Pat yourselves on the back. You did it. You're the most woke person out there. You all did it. We'll be mailing your trophies out. Congrats, everyone.
I find myself hoping, like, even if Elon Musk did buy Twitter, which I now guess is an official thing that's happened, maybe it will just die. And you know what? Maybe that's just going to be better for all of us. Maybe we can all just go home. How about that?
You know what I was thinking today? It would be such a funny thing, like a funny origin story. I don't think this is why he did it, but like the funny origin story for him doing this would be like him being really mad at Ken over the Maxwell picture. Just like that day he
Clip
was just
Einstein.
Like, yeah, just fuming like, oh, I'll show him. I'm gonna get my revenge. And he just like has gone about this like multi-year plan to get back at Ken.
He's been picking his spot.
Yeah.
He's been ready this whole time, waiting in the wings. It would just be funny if he just banned Ken and that was just the only change that he made.
And then sold it. Buys it, bans Ken, sells it.
And I would have to support it, frankly. You know,
I agree.
Sometimes
Bold,
he gets it right.
Leadership.
Yeah. Thank you, Elon. Also an Insurgents LLC board member, as everyone knows.
Yes, of course.
Yep. So let's get to our conversation with Ryan Grim. He's going to be coming on in just a moment. Before we get to Ryan, just remind you that you can subscribe to the Insurgents podcast by heading on over to theinsurgents.substack.com. You can become a paid intern of the Insurgents podcast for a measly $5 per month that you pay to the podcast, or $55 annually. Subscribe to the Insurgents podcast, and let's get to our conversation with The Intercept's Ryan Grim. He is going to be joining us right after this. I don't know if we want any banter. If like we were talking about vasectomies. Do we still want to talk about that, or just for the first 30 seconds? Think we're covered? Yeah. Well, we're off to a great start. We've got the banter, some of the classic Insurgents banter that the listeners know and love. They love to hear it.
I was going to say, we did that episode as I was like recovering and all hopped up on pain meds.
Yeah.
And I feel like I definitely overshared.
Yeah, maybe going a little bit too deep into the details of that, I think. Maybe.
I did mine at a teaching hospital, which I don't recommend, but
okay.
I wanted to get into those details.
Yeah. I mean, but that said, like, it's fine. And it's like routine and easy, and you heal in like a couple days. You're fine. Like everyone who's in a position or considering it should just do it.
Why not?
But that's not why you're here. We have a special bonus episode where Ryan's gonna like go, step by step into his procedure later on for subscribers only. But Ryan's here to talk about the CPC letter that came out this week about the U.S. involvement and potential diplomatic efforts with Russia in relation to its invasion of Ukraine. And Ryan, for people who didn't follow this too closely, there was a letter the CPC released, and anti-war advocates and progressives cheered it on because it encouraged diplomacy and potentially a resolution or conclusion to this invasion. And as time went on, things got a little bit more complicated, and ultimately it was retracted. So could you give people who didn't follow it that closely a deeper look into what happened? How did we go from this is great to we're sorry, we should have never released this in the first place, we're retracting it?
It was actually an intern that did it. We didn't even mean to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So like they sent it out Monday, and the response was like fast and furious, like a bunch of big accounts on Twitter. This was like really a Twitter-driven phenomenon. People always say like you can and should just for the most part ignore Twitter. I'm glad they don't, because that's the only place I have influence. But they should ignore me. They should ignore all the other like big blue check accounts and just push forward with material reality. But they didn't in this case, and so they think that the way that the Washington Post framed it as a dramatic kind of break from current policy was kind of unfair and like triggered a bigger reaction than they expected. I don't know. I mean, you could have framed it differently. You could have framed it as, Progressive Caucus, modestly asks, Biden to, add extra diplomatic component to his already ongoing strategy or whatever. It was a pretty modest proposal, but if you give it to the Washington Post, like what do you expect from the Washington Post? Like that's how they write stories up. And it would be if Biden started directly engaging with the Russians and pushing toward negotiations, even with unequivocal, continued support for, Ukraine's military, like that would be a significant move forward, which was the point of the letter. Like, so that blows up. So they start getting all this blowback. And then you start having some members like Mark Pocan saying, criticizing it publicly. You got Ruben Gallego, you got Chris Murphy, a couple other letter signers, I think, were reaching out privately, like, what's up with this? Because this had started to circulate for signatures back in July. It didn't come out until Monday. At that point, I believe they could have just push forward, tweet through it, be done with it. And point to the fact that the White House wasn't upset about it. It's saying the same thing as Mike Mullen, as Barack Obama. Like, you can cite all these other people that have said the same thing. Just push through it. Instead, they issue a, quote, clarification. And in their clarification, they say, of course, there will be no negotiations until after Ukrainian victory. And it's like, well, what are you like? What are you negotiating at that point?
Okay, all right.
And so then now blood is in the water, and there, now there's actual Dems in disarray. And so then the next day they fully withdraw the letter. So Jayapal puts out a statement saying that it was an unvetted letter that, and blames staff for it. The irony being, what she was implying there is that they hadn't reached back out and said, hey, remember that letter you signed? We're sending it out tomorrow. Just a heads up, which, frankly, they should have done. Like, with something this big, go ahead, send a note. There's also this system that they use called Quill that half the offices use half the time. And so there would have been updates in there if people were checking Quill, but not everybody's checking Quill. You know how this goes in an office. So, should they have emailed it out? Yeah, sure. But here's the irony. The Tuesday statement that Jayapal put out, she just put out. She did not run that by the other 29 members who had signed it and said, hey, are you cool with me withdrawing this letter on your behalf? And so, some members were like, how can Jayapal be blaming staff for what is standard practice, for the CPC chair, which is to send out statements on behalf of the CPC without running them by members. So that was Tuesday. And then, once you completely capitulate like that, then it just becomes a feeding frenzy, because then nobody's going to defend you, because if you won't defend yourself, and then it's just left for everybody to just dunk on you. Then ironically, you have people like PodSave crew, like Ben Rhodes in that clip, making the case that this was a completely uncontroversial letter. There was nothing wrong with it. And he even yelled at we called them the Ukraine stands on Twitter. He was like, if you guys dunk on everybody, punish everybody who calls for diplomacy, then anybody who's skeptical of the current policy their only outlet is going to be Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson, was pushing basically to cut him off. So he said, you are going to accidentally create the outcome that you're trying to avoid by being so nasty to the Progressive Caucus for just saying, hey, maybe we should do a little diplomacy here. And then sure enough, that night, Tucker Carlson had Tulsi Gabbard on, and they said this just proves that, the Democrats are the war party.
Yeah, I think this is been the most amazing things about this whole kind of fiasco is just how, I think you could charitably describe the sort of Progressive Caucus position on this as maybe being like 5 millimeters to Biden's left on this. Like, it was not this radical stance. It was not like, let's give all of Eastern Ukraine to Putin. They were not doing disinformatia or anything like that. Literally just saying, like, maybe we should have some kind of negotiation in conjunction with our endless arms transfers to the Ukrainian military, which just seems to be just a given for everybody. And that's I think the really such a stark example, the latest in such an example of just how completely unmoored from reality this discourse has gotten, where anyone that deviates even slightly from this line of the only possible solution to this. Jordan and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. The only possible solution is just unlimited arms transfers to the Ukrainian military and more conflict, more escalation until Russia's like unequivocal defeat, which just like, that's not a guarantee to ever even happen. And like, in the meantime, that's a lot of horrible violence that's going to be ongoing.
And what would that even mean? I mean, they could still even if you kicked every Russian troop out of Ukraine, they could still constantly send missiles in.
Yeah.
Like, is that what we want?
Well, that's what it seems to be like what a lot of people want from the way that people react to me and some of my extremely controversial stances on this that I've been articulating. But I think that's what you pointed out too, is just it's a really dangerous part of this whole discourse. Like, the idea that, it's like this dialogue and this discourse has gotten so outrageous that it's making like Pod Save America look like the gray zone. Like, it's like, and I think that was a great point, that what they were making on Pod Save America, like in that clip that you shared, Ryan. And I think this is something that not enough people are paying attention to, which is that when you're completely abdicating that entire part of the argument to the right, to the Tucker Carlsons of the world, even these like LaRoucheite cultist weirdos, the only people that are articulating this kind of argument about maybe there needs to be another way of doing this, or maybe people, articulating to people that are skeptical about this kind of endless arms transfers, and it's only going to empower them. Like, it's only going to empower just the worst people, because that's going to be a very convincing argument, not only to people in America, but to people in Western Europe as well, when this big energy crisis hits in the coming months as it continues to get colder. There's going to be a lot of appetite for that kind of analysis, and if it's only right wingers or weird cultists giving it, it's only going to empower them.
And to me, even the cynical argument that the opponents of the letter made doesn't make sense. The cynical argument was, okay, maybe we agree with you, but this is really bad timing because we're just a couple weeks away from an election, and we're all beating up Kevin McCarthy for saying that in a recession, maybe we want to attach some strings, not have a blank check to Ukraine. And we're beating him up for that. And this is election season, so don't get in our way. Don't muddy our message here. I was like, well, okay, maybe you think Kevin McCarthy's an idiot, but like, Kevin McCarthy's drawing on, the advice of a lot of very smart political operatives when he's out there talking. Tucker Carlson, maybe you think he's an idiot, but Tucker Carlson certainly seems to think that it is advantageous for Republicans, 2 weeks ago in an election, to be a party that is offering voters, some room for skepticism, around kind of endless arms transfers with no, sign of diplomacy around the corner. Like maybe you think that they're just completely wrong, but they sure don't. They are looking at the same polling, they're looking at the same kind of public sentiment around the war, and they are thinking that they're actually going to end up being on the popular side of this. They're not doing this just as a kind of moral crusade. And the letter actually, or if not the letter, the press release that came along with it, not the letter, included a bunch of polling that on this question, and the American public does support diplomacy as an end to this rather than just an open-ended war. So even the cynical, like this is electoral malpractice argument didn't make sense to me. Like you want voters who have some concerns about here to feel like the Democratic Party is a place where they can at least have those concerns heard and aired out.
That's where I'm really concerned, because most of the reactions that I saw in the immediate release of this letter were from, traditional party line Democrats and supporters who, had a ton of knee-jerk reactions about how this was just giving Putin what he wants, or they're siding with Marjorie Taylor Greene, ultimately cheering for more war. And it illustrates people's detachment from war itself. It's very easy to tweet about how you're standing with Ukraine from your apartment in DuPont Circle or from your home in the middle of America. Like, you're not under attack. You're not at any risk. But I mean, it has already killed thousands of civilians in Ukraine, and including several hundred children. And your solution is we need more war for the foreseeable future. This long, protracted, bloody, violent thing that has displaced millions of people and put millions more people on the brink of starvation around the world because of how it has affected the food supply and prices. And you're just cheering this on because you have been conditioned to think that we need to stand up to Putin. And this is a guy, like you said, you could still lob missiles from Russia, who also might resort to even increasingly drastic and severe measures if he is further embarrassed. And I'm really worried about that being a predominantly Democratic reaction to a really modest proposal of peace and diplomacy, and how that might cede ground to the right for hollow demagogues like Tucker Carlson and now new, quote, Republican Tulsi Gabbard to exploit. I'm really worried about that. I'm wondering if you have heard that from any progressives in Congress who maybe initially signed it but then had to retract their names, or other progressive groups. Is that something they're worried about?
I think that they wonder at this point whether the people I think they're starting to associate a lot of the calls, a lot of the anti-war calls with either a populist right or a checked out nut job conspiracy land, like LaRoucheite type position. Like I don't think, and I think they're wrong. I think that those are the loudest voices, but I think that they're, and like we were just talking about the public polling, it shows that this is, a pretty, common concern across people of, Democrats, Independents, Republicans. But I think what a lot of Democrats, progressive Democrats in Congress have done is they believe that people who are yelling at them about this are just hate them, period. And they're never supporting them. They're kind of Dem exit type who are just looking for a reason to attack them. I don't think that that's right. But my sense is that that's the impression that a lot of progressive Democrats have at this point. And, they're kind of on their own in a lot of ways. You see this, they take this very ginger step. And if you notice, for the most part, the kind of anti-war left, or whatever you want to call it, either ignored the letter or kind of attacked it as too weak. So it's not like they have some kind of groundswell of support for kind of making these kind of modest interventions in the debate to try to crack open a space for debate and dialogue around this. And so from the one side, they're not getting any support. From the other side, they're getting absolutely crushed and annihilated. So I do think there's a sense of kind of powerlessness.
Another question I had was about the reaction and kind of speculation, or if you want to call it navel gazing, at Jayapal's role in this. And there were a lot of criticisms about how she handled it. She blamed her staff. That turned out to be probably not true. I can't imagine. Well, knowing how comms offices work.
Even if it's true, even if it's true that they didn't give a heads up, which I think they should have, and certainly they did not give a heads up to some offices. Even if that's true, mistakes are made with the rollout of every single thing, and you pull it off anyway. To me, the real mistake was in caving. You just push through on this, and you're done with it.
Yeah.
So it's over by Monday night. We're not talking about this at all. We might be talking about
You pointed out how the Post was maybe sensational in how they covered it. and how that kind of fanned these flames. But I feel like that's something the CPC really needs to understand is probably going to happen most, if not all of the time when covering something they do.
Yeah.
How are they unprepared for this?
Right. I mean, if you want to go to the Washington Post, then prepare yourself for, the Washington Post likes to get people fighting. Like that's not a judgment. That's just what they do. So yeah, right. And also you should, in some respects, if you're doing this letter, you want this fight. Like you want the attention around it.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's just the thing that I found the most frustrating about the way that this discourse has gone is that people have seemed really eager to swallow this really kind of black and white, very trite kind of good versus evil narrative about what has gone on here. And any nuance whatsoever about, the role that the West played in fanning the flames of this conflict, which I don't think should be that controversial when you talk about, the expansion of NATO, the role that the West played in destroying Russia and humiliating Russia in the 90s, and the way that the West has been, pumping arms into Ukraine for years now prior to this breaking out. And I think if you can kind of ignore all that context and you just view this as some fundamental battle between good and evil, and the Americans and the West are on the good side and the Russians are the evil side, then of course, and having any kind of dialogue is just completely off the table, or having any kind of negotiation is just not even an option. But that's been the disheartening thing, I think, is just like people have just been so steadfastly unwilling even to acknowledge that the West played even if you want to admit it, that is a small role in fanning the flames of this conflict, of providing Putin with this justification. Not that means that it is justified or that it's good, anything that's happened, or that the horrible violence that has ensued is a good thing that anyone should celebrate. But even just this basic reality that the West has played a role in provoking it. And people have just been really, really unwilling to even entertain that notion. And that's what's led to this very myopic discourse about it, where there's really only one option, which is further violence and further war, and that's the only thing that we can ever discuss. And
it's really hard to talk about that without it coming off as if you're justifying it, because people have such a hard time holding two thoughts in their minds at once. Yes. And so I think a lot of people are just like, well, forget it. I'm not even going to try to get you to hold these two thoughts in your mind at once. The other element of this that has had me shaking my head so much is you constantly see this argument, on the one hand, from like a Julia Yaffe type, that Putin is a bloodthirsty monster and just must be, annihilated, which people just don't seem to like take that to its conclusion. Then, okay, well, what do you mean then? So you want him out? Like, what? You want to occupy?
That's the inevitable conclusion of the Putin equals Hitler, the constant comparisons. Well, what does that mean? We need World War III? Is that the only possible solution to this? Like, it kind of seems like that.
And then a sort of corollary of that one is that how can you negotiate with Putin? You can't trust Putin because you point to things that Putin has agreed to and then broken with. It's like if a country breaking a treaty or their word meant that you could never negotiate with that treaty again. Okay, come on, people. Think here. Yeah. Has the United States ever made any diplomatic promises, high profile ones even in recent years? And then
no one knows,
and just abruptly walked away from them. Have we ever done that? And if you don't even have to talk about the Iran deal. Like, you could talk about like negotiations around NATO and Eastern Europe. Like, if you're a Russian citizen and you're hearing that that the United States thinks that Russia doesn't live up to its bargain, you're like, wait a minute. First of all, after the fall of communism, we expected that we were going to get like a Marshall Plan. Like, we were led to believe we were going to get a Marshall Plan and rebuild the country. Instead, we got, completely stripped of everything by the West. Which
is a massive human rights disaster, too, right. The reality of it.
Right. It's like, which the Russians should have recognized, that the Marshall Plan was implemented as a counter to the Soviet Union. So once the Soviet Union's gone, we don't have any need for the Marshall Plan anymore. Okay. So then from there, after Ukraine becomes independent and there are these other breakaway countries coming out of the Soviet Union, we make all sorts of pledges and assertions that we're not going to creep NATO any further eastward. And this is even separate from the question of whether the United States or NATO kind of provoked this. Like, put that aside. Clearly, 1,000%, we made pledges that we then broke. And we still feel like we're allowed to negotiate. We feel like we can engage in diplomacy. You know, I would urge the United States to engage in diplomacy now with Venezuela, with Cuba, with try to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. Like, we're not incapable of diplomacy just because we are like demonstrably not trustworthy. Like, no country is 100% trustworthy because you still have interests and you still have politics at play even after you've signed whatever you've signed. But that doesn't mean there's no point in diplomacy. And so people like apply that to Putin, but don't apply it anywhere else in the world.
The same level of attention has not been given to some of the aid packages and this push in the Senate now by Jack Reed and Inhofe, who basically want like a blank check and emergency powers for the Pentagon. And this would, refill our stockpile and allow, ease, I guess, the flow of weapons and munitions to Ukraine. And
well, the Pentagon's really hard up for cash, so it makes sense that
totally.
they need the extra little boost.
We have a GoFundMe in the show notes if anyone can help out. But like, it speaks to obviously how people don't cover this type of stuff in a real holistic way, and also how comfortable people are with the status quo. Have you seen progressive groups or progressive members of Congress talk about this? And because in the letter it said like they're fine basically supporting even more aid. Which I thought was like, a pretty big olive branch to the Hawks. Yeah. So I just don't understand how this isn't even meant part of the discussion.
Well, it is now, at least. So, hey, thank you, Progressive Caucus. Yeah. like the people who had been, like Mike Mullen and others who had been, urging, negotiations, they had mostly just been ignored. Like, oh, that's an interesting comment, and then moving on. But now. And like Pod Save crew, for instance, like now because of this controversy, at least those voices are being heard. So in some ways, they started a conversation. In other ways, they it was set back badly.
Those dangerous tankies at the Pod Save America.
Right.
I've been warning people about these guys for a while now. I don't know. Yeah, it speaks to how absolutely unhinged some of this discourse has gotten. I think, the last time this came up, Jordan, you brought up our interview with Spencer Ackerman a couple months ago. And I think he said something at the end of that show that has stuck with me a lot. And Spencer, in kind of giving sort of an explanation for how this event's happened, was very, very clear in not using that explanation to justify anything. We were very clear to say that, an explanation for anything is not a justification for it. And we're very clear, and I'd like to be clear with both of you now and our listeners, that Putin bad. Okay, I agree.
Invasion's bad, even if they're provoked.
Absolutely. Yeah. But Spencer was really said something at the end of this episode that stuck with me, that people are going to have to, and this has not happened. This was way back in March 10th of earlier this year. With that, people are going to have to kind of separate the idea in their minds of saving Ukraine and defeating Russia, and we have to understand that these might be two mutually exclusive ideas. And that's the kind of very discouraging thing about where this discourse has gone over the last couple of months, which is no one has really been able to do that. No one in kind of with a mainstream platform, and no one seemingly, with a higher position in the U.S. government or the Canadian government. And it's the longer this is going on, it just seems like the more entrenched people have gotten in this position that defeating Putin, defeating Russia is the only possible solution to this. And, it's weirdly as well the people that have been arguing for some kind of negotiation or who have been talking about wanting to end the war, which would actually save lives and prevent Ukraine from continuing to be a war zone, are framed as the sort of dangerous radicals, and the ones that are just have this one single-minded obsession with further conflict and defeating Russia and humiliating Russia are the kind of reasonable the reasonable liberal sort of position. And it's as I was saying a couple of weeks ago when this came up, I'm going to continue saying it. It's just kind of a sort of dangerous situation when this is where the discourse has gone. And I would like to think that maybe this incident will get maybe people starting to think about different ideas. Like I was encouraged to see the Pod Johns talking about this, but it still seems like there's a long way to go before people start really internalizing this idea.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's going to be a brutal winter, and we don't know how the shape of this is going to go. The reaction from some Democrats who signed that letter in saying, well, yeah, I signed that in July. That's when Ukraine was getting whooped, but now they're on the rampage. Like that was that's not how they said it, but that was basically their point. That like this, the context was different. The objective conditions were different when I was calling for peace, calling for diplomacy to end this war. That's also like a weird way of, I mean, I get it, but like that's not a very principled commitment to diplomacy. Like only when you're on your heels are you gonna call for it. But once you're moving forward and making gains on the ground, then let's just keep it going, even as the winter approaches and you have millions of people who are going to be suffering and dying from, they're freezing to death, disease from, sewage treatment plants not working. So many people don't even have windows because their windows have been blown out, and there's no way to get replacement glass in. You have a nuclear power plant that is still on the front lines of a war, and this is before you get to whether or not Putin escalates this to an actual nuclear strike. And because Ukraine you were against that when Ukraine was was kind of in a stalemate, but now you're for allowing all this escalation because they're making some gains on the ground, which perhaps you could win those gains back through diplomacy and some offers of sanctions relief or whatever, and some pledges of not joining NATO, whatever. Get to the table and maybe you get that back anyway. And now Zelensky's saying he wants Crimea.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's going to be that's a realistic ask. Right.
But according to our stated theory of, well, it's up to the Ukrainians, we don't have any say in this, then we have to be okay, here you go, fire away.
I think to Rob, what you were saying, the Spencer quote about separating these two things is defeating Russia, which, I mean, think about the early narratives in this invasion. It was not this, strong, mighty, resilient Ukrainian army. It was, people making, I mean, even media outlets were showing this is how you make a Molotov cocktail. And you saw all these human interest pieces praising just, grandmas who were fighting back. I mean, that is not a country, if that's the framing that we should accept. It's not a country who's well equipped to defeat a superpower. A nuclear superpower. And I think to what Ryan is saying, that the timing and the shift and what kind of footing you're on, that's dictating apparently whether or not we should be engaging in diplomacy, I think is totally I think I agree. It's just totally misguided, because this letter came out on the heels of a few weeks of fear and nervousness and skittishness about, Putin resorting to something drastic. Him being, Ukraine being on much stronger footing than they were in the summer doesn't mean that things are going to be a breeze going forward. I think that increases the likelihood he could resort to something like that. I pray he doesn't, but I think that's something that people need to consider. And that's why at the same time, and this was also not mentioned in a lot of the coverage, Austin has been communicating multiple times over the weekend, was in communications with Russian military officials. We don't know the full context of those calls, but he had at least 2 calls in 3 days with the head of the Russian military. So it's just there are conversations happening. I think just the issue for so many people was that it was the progressives doing this 2 weeks before the election. That was something I kept seeing. How could you do this 2 weeks before the election? It's maybe it doesn't fucking matter to Ukrainians who just want stability when our midterm election is.
Yeah.
Right. And if you want to be cynical and be you know what? There are plenty of people who are receptive to that message. So you can have it both ways, actually.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who see the Democrats as I think would be great if they leaned into it, but see them as the the anti-war party. I hope they take up that mantle.
If there are any PhDs candidates like listening to this, like one dissertation I'd love to see somebody do would be the effect of midterms on our imperial foreign policy, because I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I remember, just reading through history, like so many times, like decisions are made around like what you're doing in Nicaragua or whatever, like what you're doing in the Philippines or whatever, around midterms. Well, we would like to like get a deal here and get this done, but we're only 12 months away from the midterms of the 1910 midterms or whatever. The most important election of our lifetime, 1910 midterms, or whatever the midterm coming up relative to a certain conflict is. And so then the result is then they just ramp up the conflict because that's safer politically. And then, guess what? Now there's a presidential election coming.
Yeah, and then you get into stuff with like Nixon and Vietnam, or like the Iran-Contra stuff where,
But so I wonder if you could actually statistically draw some correlation between kind of U.S. conflict abroad and midterms, or it'd be an interesting PhD, I think.
Yeah. I don't think we have any PhDs listen to this show, though, unfortunately. I'm going to mute myself here, but not the brightest listener base.
Yeah, we got to cut that.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure to edit that out afterwards. But
they won't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, just getting back into it. Okay, Ryan. So thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us. We're just laughing at an unrelated joke that happened earlier off mic.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So Ryan, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We know you have to get going soon.
Likewise.
But we appreciate you joining us once again.
Yep, you got it. All right, see you guys.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to The Insurgents. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify or at Substack, theinsurgents.substack.com. You'll get the latest episodes delivered straight to your inbox as well as our newsletter. On Twitter, we are at InsurgentsPod. Tweet at us, harass Ken in our replies, and then send us your hate mail to theinsurgentspod@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening.